All right. Now, exciting times. I'd like to pass things over to Charlotte, Mickey, and Rebecca Jimmy to introduce our keynote speaker, Alfred Holden. But before I do that,
generally speaking,
I would
the reduction
like to all let you know
would
that
be
this
from
is
approximately 11
the
stories.
ooh. Can we possibly mute people who aren't speaking?
Yeah, just did.
Thank you. Before I do that, I want you to all know that this is the Charlotte from the wonderful documentary entitled Charlotte's Castle that had its premiere in another legendary Annex location, the Hot Docs Theater. I highly recommend that you watch this if you have not already done so, but I'm going to pass this over to Rebecca and Charlotte now.
Hi, so am I on screen? Can you hear me and all of that stuff?
Can hear you.
Okay, I should be seeable. So I'd like to introduce my new friend, my wonderful new friend, Alfred Holden. Many of you probably know him from the Toronto Star, where he did amazing work, and also the beloved Tattle Creek magazine. Alfred is now a cliff dweller, not a cliffhanger, in the annex of the condominium species at 190 St. George. And he's prepared a very special presentation that is absolutely bursting with images and that manages to be, I think, hard-hitting and at the same time, dare I say, rather Proustian. So I hope people will enjoy themselves. I think they will. My other lovely friend, fellow board member at ARA, and also my colleague at No Dem Evictions, Rebecca Jimmy, who lives at 145 St. George, would like to say a few words now, and she's kindly helping out tonight with the technicals here. So she's right in the room, and I'm going to move so she can sit in my seat.
It's like the old days before Zoom then. Hello, everyone, and I'm Rebecca Jimmy, and thank you, Charlotte. Yes, check out Charlotte's Castle when you can. I just wanted to also be able to say thank you to the ARA, who've been so supportive. I am a board member, but they have been very supportive of my ongoing demo eviction fight with 145 St. George. And we actually just minutes ago got some good news. City Council did pass some more supports for tenants, and tenant consultation. So it's been a really wonderful journey. It's been a really wonderful journey, and I should say it's been very difficult for someone who's generally a private person to be able to talk about so many personal things. And something that has been a real touch point for me the last couple of years was this beautiful article, I believe it was 1999, Tattle Creek, written by Alfred, about the joys of the apartment buildings in the annex, specifically up my street. And it is an absolute pleasure to have now met him and be able to introduce him here tonight. And I have introduced him to my building and my neighbors, and you'll hear more about that. So thanks, everyone. Here we go. Like the old days, you get some applause.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rebecca and Charlotte. It's such a pleasure to be here. I think this has been long delayed because I've lived in the annex for 43 years, but I seem to keep my head down. I'm not quite sure why, but you don't hear from me too much. Well, you don't see me. You hear from me all the time, don't you, in the stuff I write? But here's what I look like. I feel like I'm like Ian Brown. I think Ian Brown once worked in radio. As a matter of fact, I think, Ian, that you might have interviewed me on CBC, and I was live with my bicycle from the Wheat Chief Tavern standing outside. It's about 20 years ago, at least.
That's right. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, you remember that, eh? It was fun. At any rate, it's so great to be here and have you see me finally, even though I've lived here for so long. I think I've been to a few ARA events. I once walked Adrienne Clarkson home, and that was a pleasure. And if she's on tonight, I'd just like to say that was also an honor, Your Excellency, to walk you home from the Quaker Meeting House, right?
Alfred, Adrienne Clarkson has sent her apology. She and John Ralston Saul cannot come tonight, but they wish you the best, and they wish everyone in the ARA.
All right, thank you for relaying that message. So the way I'd like to begin, I guess, is with a bit of history. And this is history not from a book, but that I've witnessed myself. And I've sort of been dying to talk about it for a long time. I did write that article, but that's now 25 years ago, Rebecca. And a lot of things have happened since, and we're sort of watching it happen right now. Getting down to brass tacks, though, I've lived in 4 buildings. And the street has changed a lot in this time. But also it hasn't. The look of it right now, I'd say, if you click to the St. George Street, this is probably about 30 years ago, and it looks pretty much the same right now. This is how we're going to do our time traveling tonight, by the way. We're going to time travel on old Kodachrome. So someone mentioned gorgeous trees. Well, here you have 4 elms on your right that kind of fill up the space. And these trees survive to this day. I've watched the Norway maples disappear, a few silvers, but those American elms hang on. Not one has been lost. And I think that's a great sign of hope for us and the street and maybe the apartment buildings. So you can click to the next slide. So let's start about in the early 80s. That is little me, 140-pound me, on a patio at 88 Bernard. I think everybody knows this building. If you click one more, there it is. And this building was once called the Panoramic. And the reason for that is this beautiful viewpoint from the top, which was locked to us, but we all managed to get keys from the superintendent. He'd look the other way and we'd go up there. And I believe an architect named Eddie Richmond designed it. And I would say he was a very efficient architect and did a good job. We call ourselves cliff dwellers. And I think it's a pretty literal thing. My first apartment was this bachelor looking north on the north side of 88 Bernard. And it was a tiny place. Well, it wasn't that tiny by today's standards, I suppose. I click one more and you'll see the kind of mischief we got up to. Literally up to the roof. We would go and sunbathe right on the gravel on the upper scene. In 1984, I was given, I swapped apartments. This is one of those things that happens. If the Cold War between the landlord and the tenant is somehow warmed a bit, I swapped apartments to get this one. Click one more, and I got this view. How about that? And my neighbor, Nina Poss, her real name, there she is. She took my old bachelor apartment. Stick with this slide for a second, because I think it shows how good life is in these buildings. But just the same, despite these beings showing all our comfortable lives, I think that next to the folks on the ground, although I was surprised to hear 70% of the members in the annex of ARA are renters, but next to the folks in the mansions on the ground, it sometimes seems like we're too solitude. So I'm going to tell you about what it's like to live in the apartments. One reason, stick with this slide, one reason apartment buildings stand up so, one reason we're two solitudes is because these apartment buildings stand up so well as their own communities. And we've kind of witnessed this at 145. So if you go to any of these buildings, almost at any time, you will find people gathering and greeting. Rebecca had a hard time getting over here tonight because so many people wanted to talk to her as she was leaving 145. And there's Rebecca and Pat Johnson, who ran for mayor. It was a brilliant, brilliant exercise to get to talk to people. Boy, that's an invention, should patent. So we get this meet and greet, just like people do on a block, on a street. Now, we also have lives. I've written in here that there have been dalliances, divorces, children conceived and welcomed into the world. Annex apartments have been swapped and lusted after. Sublet, that's an important one because that results in, click to the next slide. Sometimes if your sublet doesn't go well, you consider your apartment stolen. This one was a long story. When the superintendents retire, This is what happens. Who knew? I know another super who married one of his tenants. How about that? And to sort of bridge this into the condo where I live now, which actually is just like an apartment, but only a different tenure. Long, complicated story, but the superintendents there are just as cherished. And this is the card somebody sent to the ones that were retiring at 190 St. George. And keep in mind, we have here the 2024 give and take table of the folks at 145 St. George Street. So isn't that nice? I don't know who got this photo. Who took this photo?
Charlotte.
Charlotte did. Okay, this is where I have to give you a little sort of transition here. We're not just here to look at the pretty pictures and reminisce. We are logged on here today to reckon with apartment life in the annex at what I call here rather vaguely, I suppose, but a juncture of eras with the question, what can be done? And at the outset, I would like to say, being an apartment dweller in a high-rise building, I'm confident that no matter what is built in our neighborhood or who moves in, I know that they will become part of the annex community. And I even have some confidence in the architecture. This is 23 St. Mary, which is across from the threatened, demoviction threatened 25. But I think this is very good architecture. It's a tall building on a tiny lot, and it is against the sidewalk. Well, I think architecture, this proves architecture can be good. And I did want to remind everybody that apartments have never been an easy sell in a way, or multiple unit dwellings have never been an easy sell. We have the first wave of apartment houses in Toronto was a shock to the city. And here we have a paper that documented some of it, a pioneering and excellent paper done some years ago. Okay, some of you may know this picture. This is the mansion at Bloor and St. George. Well, actually, no, it's an older picture. So I don't know which building it is, but it illustrates how the wave of apartment buildings that went up in the 50s and 60s, the ones that I love so much, shocked the neighborhood. And look at this. You could buy pieces of the houses by walking up and down St. George. 5 bathroom sets, lumber, everything. So in a relatively short time, maybe 4 or 5 years, from 1955 to, say, 62, the neighborhood was transformed. You have the Three Sisters by E.I. Richmond across. You got 145 on the right. And these sort of went up so fast, you just like now, you just blink. I didn't see that yesterday. Yes. It was happening at such a breakneck speed that one of the architects of the building, and here he is, this is Leo Venturuti, but stick with this slide for a moment. I had a great quote from him. I interviewed him on the phone. He said to me, he was shocked himself when he was a young U of T graduate just getting going in architecture. He said, an owner builder would go out and grab a couple of houses on St. George Street and get a rezoning. That's what he said to me. Here, he said, oh yeah, you could put a 10-story building right up against some lady's house in the annex. How's that? Click to next, which he did at 214 St. George and at 224. And meanwhile, he worked for the McMichaels on a house in Kleinburg for their group of 7 paintings. So in time, the apartment houses, just the same, became communities and finally part of the annex community. Now, the topic of this meeting tonight and the mix of people here, I think, are proof that the old line between the solitudes is getting thin indeed in 2024. The upset is, what will happen in the current circumstances to, click ahead. Unless I, to 145 St. George. This picture is a lot of 40 years old. Then everybody else on the street, on Spadina, on Walmer Road. I think this building was, is this the building?
No.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Keep going. Okay, and apartments everywhere in Toronto. These are the Uno Pre buildings up in North York that you see when you're on your A320 coming into town. So stick with this for a moment. Now, John Lawrence wrote in Spacing magazine, I think it was about a year ago, that across the city there are about I'm quoting him, about 3,500 rental units in buildings with more than 20 apartments that are now facing demolition. I have heard to say it, but I've heard more recently that the estimate is now 5,000, which I find to be, in the circumstances, a staggering number.
Yeah.
So there we have
Yeah.
the result on St. George that you see. I'm a little off script here. Sorry about that, Tija. But I wanted to say that I have lived here so long and so comfortably. And despite what Elizabeth was telling me, I must have been dozing in my hammock on the 8th floor above Lowther Avenue as demoviction, click here, evolved from Toronto's overheated real estate market.
Yeah.
Now, my excuse for not knowing
Oh, you are muted.
Sorry, Alf. I think
how about now?
there you're back. Sorry about that.
Did you miss much?
Yeah.
Nope, just one sentence.
Oh, okay. We're looking here at 145, and I was basically saying that my excuse for not knowing about demoviction was simply this idea that big buildings like this were too big to tear down. And in fact, it was part of my advertising to my friends. When friends living in cut up old houses, that's how I called it, that's cut up old houses complained about crooked floors and weird landlords, I would suggest moving to St. George Street or into a cheerful Uno Pre building. Or how about something on Spadina by this man, Wilfred Schulman? The lobby of the building he designed at 206 St. George Street once looked like this. I told people that apartment houses were more corporate and business-like. They were designed by architects to be apartments. And in towers from the 50s, like on St. George, the windows and the floor plans were especially good. There are still views like this from mid-levels at 145 St. George. I would tell folks that more often than not, the paid superintendent and her husband were on your side. I told them apartments and buildings might even be cheaper. And people took me up. Dave LeBlanc, architecture columnist of the Globe and Mail. I thought he'd be watching tonight, and I was going to say, didn't you and Chantel go modern at 169 St. George after me? Well, they did. Sean McAuliffe, Spacing Magazine and the Great Toronto Star, lived in a tower near Summerhill. And it turns out these tenants were not antisocial zombies, but citizens with their minds open to apartment life glories. Great ones and small. Yes, that is a mantis praying. So, okay. I don't believe I've ever quoted Karl Marx. I've been more the admirer of architecture critic Ada Louise Huxtable, who also said something like, all that is solid melts into air. Actually, she was talking about architecture and said, all that solid brick and stone mean nothing. And concrete is as evanescent as air. I think that's a 63 Chevrolet about to drive by 145 St. George. So in February, I wrote to one of you in the ARA. Here are my exact words. I am shocked by the predicament of the people of 145, a robust mid-century apartment house by marquee architects. That's James Crank, big firm in Toronto. There's George Boak, his partner of the modern era, you can see, who did important work. I wrote that 145 is a building with soundproof apartments. Thank you, Krang and Boak. And those roomy 50s layouts. Thank you. Detailed throughout with period touches and especially nice terrazzo floors. This is what you also saw in Montreal in 1960 when you took a flight to Europe and were in first class and you just walk across one of these floors. Okay, stay with this for a moment. I'm going to confess something that bothers a lot of reporters, and that is, we often ache to bring solutions to the problems that we encounter in the stories that we cover. We want to make everybody happy. I guess it's a common thing. How ideal is that? But, click on, housing is a very tough one. I see that I was at it myself in 1984 as a cub reporter, and I have no solution yet. But the people of 145 have laid out their situation to me and quite a few others. They've sleuthed for an answer on their own and with help from others, including many of you in the ARA. I would say, let's not break out the balloons just yet. You do see these things from apartment buildings on St. George. It's from my old place. But bear with me. It is clear you are having an effect. I'm looking at Rebecca from across the table. Hey, we suddenly have a picture of Atlantic City, but actually I want this here. We have all heard the expression elephant in the room. And we all know that it means that the problem is right there in front of us, but not being seen. What sort of headway have 145ers made? Along with you on the ARA, well, you have been exposing the elephants. I've been counting them, and they are now adding up. What I'm going to try to do is sum up the findings in a way that might help you. This is how Sean McAuliffe nailed it in the Star. Please read the headline there. We are tearing down what we actually want to build. With this sort of a backwards policy, will we ever catch up? But it's not just the market. It's also how we've responded. In Toronto, we have doubled down on increasing long-term supply, even to the point of encouraging existing housing to come down. This is sort of like urban renewal. It sounds good. We will get more and better housing, right? Well, I have another elephant for you, and it's the 25-year building boom. I've covered it myself. It has flooded the housing market with multiple unit dwellings, tens of thousands, mostly condominiums, some rentals. And now, for reasons that are not so hard to crack, the high cost of land and construction, this boom, the longest that I know of anywhere has transformed the skyline of the city. But it has failed to make a dent in the affordability problem. Did anyone else hear that quote on CBC radio yesterday morning on one of the early shows? I was in the shower, I couldn't write it down. I can't even remember everything I do when I'm in the shower, but that Greater Toronto, I heard that Greater Toronto is losing 15 affordable units for every one built. Is it that bad? I'm looking over at Rebecca and she's shrugging. So for a little inspiration, I would like to, or maybe it's just good advice, but I'd like to borrow some words from Rachel Carson in Silent Spring, who said, we should look about and see what other course is open to us. Well, on the positive side of this battle, new policy proposals are being issued one after the other by all levels of government. Now, you advocates can assess these promises way better than I can, but the noise is good. You, and I'm looking at Rebecca, but I mean all the people in the ARA and 140 demoviction, what's it called, demoviction?
No demoviction.
No demoviction. You were all early to a conversation which started rather muted. But it is now front page news every single day. Click one more. Oh, well, good. Okay, this is from yesterday, just yesterday. And I believe that this being top of the news has given you the opening needed, that you are well positioned to re-tackle the absurd dilemma of demoviction of Ontario tenants in a very powerful way. And I say this from some inside knowledge. I have witnessed as a reporter what I might have called information cringe, where you publish something and it transforms the public debate on it. I've seen this in politicians, and I have seen them change their minds quickly. On Tuesday, Up Express service was cut. On Wednesday, it was restored. Housing's going to take a little longer. But I say, speed things up by pointing to elephants, explaining things to people, going after them. Okay, let me talk about a couple of these elephants that I've noticed that have appeared from all of what you said to me. Most of you already know some of these. Click one. Ah, yes, the number one is zoning. Now, I know what you're going to tell me, that you've serenaded about this zoning with megaphones from the Annex treetops to no avail. Why is it so easy to change zoning now, when doing so is making worse the problem we want to solve? In my deepest heart, I would say that some might say that zoning belongs to the movers and shakers. But try these other reasons too, they may help you more. These zoning changes may be coming so quickly because of a lack of understanding. Not enough other ideas, desperation, this is important, desperation to be seen doing something, anything about the housing crisis. There may be other hidden reasons. The slide you have on your screen now, though, shows that ideas are emerging. I dare say they're coming from absolutely everywhere. Some of you in the ARA, maybe Jim, would remember that would notice that old ideas are coming back. On zoning, for instance, does anyone here remember a fabled mayor's temporary height limit, which didn't stop Toronto's growth, by the way, but it did help us catch our breath and choose a better direction? Now another elephant. Some of you know about this. I encountered it as a young reporter. I couldn't figure it out. You see, someone has circled, no one understands. I never figured it out either. Then what I'm talking about is the historic disproportionately higher taxes on apartment buildings. There's a number in there. See, it says 3 times greater. I saw another number in another clipping that said apartments are taxed at 4 times the rate of single-family homes. Now, these may not apply anymore, these numbers, but I understand there is still a disparity. And I would say that this is one of those giant elephants no one ever sees. What a discouragement to construction this would have been for as long as it's been in effect. And it perhaps reflects a prejudice against apartment buildings more than any revenue cost equation. I did look into this matter. And I went here to find some information, but you really do have to dig around. And I think it's one of those things you have to sort of dedicate a week to. Maybe in the discussion, one of you can shed some light on the disparity today between residential property tax and apartments. Regardless of that, though, I did want to mention something, perhaps you'd call it an elephant in the shadows. And that is, we need to figure out if there is a buried change in policy or one coming in the form of lower property tax for new builds only. This idea, Charlotte and I have heard floated as an incentive to build. And at first, listen, sounds good, right? Well, I think that would be a mistake. And it's a simple equation. Think for a minute. If an older building is taxed at a higher rate than a new build, what's that going to do to the value of the existing stock? It's going to prompt demolition of more of it. I'm going to add a similar problem that the insiders know all about, but if there are many people watching tonight who probably don't follow all this, I certainly was asleep myself. When you tear down an existing building, you clear it of rent-controlled tenants. Now, that's an incentive to tear down, says the elephant. Stay with this, yes. Much has been said of the tenant relocation program known as TRAP. It contains many mysteries, such as where do you locate residents of large, full apartment houses in a market that's tight, even for unaffordable housing? Stay with this. But whether it works may not be as important as its mere existence, spreading the message right now that tenants are taken care of. At doing this, TRAP has been a resounding success. In the laundry room at 190 St. George, across from 145, someone said to me, well, at least the tenants will be okay. Some journalists have taken this at face value. TRAP is hard to figure out and explain. It can be fit into a greedy tenant story easily. The policy's effects, they hide in the future. It is easy to report he says, she says, which sounds so neutral, but isn't very helpful. Let's nail this problem down just a little more. It takes years and years to plan, demolish, and build. How many tenants can really come back? With the help of our local MPP, Jessica Bell, serious critiques have been taken to Queen's Park. Politicians of all stripes have been mostly unresponsive while pointing to TRAP. It has worked wonders at easing consciences. Big as an elephant, TRAP is emerging as a grotesque. It's maybe responsible for demolishing more affordable housing too. Stay with this, please, this picture. What else? There is a giant and long-lived animal that I would like to point to, that in good measure, the soft parts of this talk hope to debunk. Just the other day, Premier Doug Ford was responding to a proposal to allow fourplexes across the province. Said Doug, I can assure you 1000%, You go in the middle of communities and start putting up 4-story, 6-story, 8-story buildings right deep in communities, there's going to be a lot of shouting and screaming. That's a massive mistake. He went on to say, we're going to build homes, single dwelling homes, townhomes. That's what we're going to focus on. The premier has been called out.
Hi. So I've just undergone the.
Okay, the premier has been called out, but he has not backed down. I don't think Doug was setting policy. He was displaying to voters the old bias. More could be said. Prejudices feel ridiculous when the one discriminated against is you. I have a theory that prejudice lingers in us all as a legacy of a need to be suspicious of that tribe over there, which was surely after your tribe's woolly mammoth. For what it's worth, apartments and tenants are not viewed with suspicion in France, where this one in Marseille by Le Corbusier is called Radiant City, or in Barcelona, where tourists visit Gaudi's La Pedrera, which is as famous as his church. Apartments are okay, even in Montreal. For the record, this is how we cliff dwellers dwell on St. George, on Spadina, on Walmer Road. We vote, besides paying those padded taxes. And in fact, an enlightened newspaper editor once wrote this headline about apartment living in Toronto. And in case you're only listening, it said, the headline says, it's not strictly for the birds. I'm going to provide a related note. You hear about bad tenants, like you do, I would say, like you do lost luggage. But you know, when I lived at 88 Bernard, 169 St. George Street, which what it was like Philip Johnson's house, but with apartments. And now living at 190 St. George, where there are also renters. Well, living in all these places, one of the things I've been struck by is how much the residents cared about the buildings and how the apartment landlords seemed mostly not to. The late Gaetan Daddario, formerly a Montreal landlord, by the way, Charlotte and Rebecca and me all being Montrealers, he told me on the phone, he did not like 44 Walnut Road, the Uno Pre masterpiece he had just bought. And you know, he kind of destroyed it, you know. I watched this happen. Cutting off the decorative railings wasn't easy. See the pieces, they're piled over there on the right on the lawn. They filled trucks with tons and tons of debris, which points to another elephant, kind of a new one, just getting more visible. And that is the more iffy quality of new build. I just had to mention this because the current manager of our 50-year-old 190 St. George Street also runs new buildings, and he has stories to tell about what's new. Click. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, I think we do. Oh, yes. We go back to, no, I think we had, no, I go to, hello, everybody, you see me again. What I'm saying to everyone with both these stories and this attempt to sort of summarize the legislative lawmaking problems that you face is that if you add all these elephants together and throw in a raccoon or two and tell everybody, they'll understand better and you have increasing chances of success. I would say ordinary people, representatives, city staff, Don't forget news reporters, cutting edge and good-hearted developers. I could tell you, I could give you a couple names, although I don't think they may be retired by now. People should understand when they hear these arguments. Now, I've much enjoyed talking to you, but I can tell you that I've been working on this since February, I don't know when we met, but February 18th or so. And it's been very tough grappling with it because among all the issues there is heartbreak and hardship. Somebody used another word that's human suffering. Charlotte used that the other night. I'm trying to imagine the horror residents of 145 feel as all this jeopardy and politics and money swirl about. And I even heard something here's something. Have you ever heard vulnerable people discuss exit via assisted suicide due to losing their home? If you think I'm exaggerating, you need to talk to the very elderly at 145 or 25 St. Mary Street. Now, to end, I would like to quote our old friend. Here she is. Can we, yes, no, we're good, we're good. We all know this is in her kitchen. She's in her kitchen at 69 Albany Avenue. Click one more, the last slide, and here she is at the Great Hall at Hart House, listening. I would like to humbly invoke for myself and for you, all of you, it might be an inspiration, it was to me, what she wrote in her last book. And she was quite experienced at taking on huge issues in giant cities with big bureaucracies and powerful players. She wrote, I can only apologize for being less omniscient. Am I corrected there? Mm-hmm. I can only apologize for being less omniscient than I should be as I take up a responsibility, which I hope readers will also assume, for trying to do the small bit I can to give stabilizing correction a push. So closing, I will say that the chance of success, I think, is improving. And I say, keep pushing. And that is my message. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.
So back to Rita.
That was really incredible. Thank you so much, Alfred. I hope a lot of people understand, or it brings to life, some of the people that live in these buildings that we so often walk by, but maybe we don't really appreciate the life and the history that they contain.
If Ian Brown wants to know more, I've got the folders.
I'm sure he'll be contacting you.
I've been to Alfred's apartment, and Alfred absolutely has the folders, believe me. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we live in the best neighborhood. We really do, but it's not just the way it looks, it's the people.
So I guess I should jump in here just to say that another neighbor who I've met just recently and who's absolutely wonderful as well, who lives diagonally across the street from me, Leanne Stanfield, wanted to have a few words just to talk a little bit about living in her apartment building, the Vincennes, which is an Uno pre-building. It's gorgeous. And I just have to, as a side note, I should say it's built on the property of the Eaton family. And when my apartment building, Spadina Gardens, went up, that was the family that was so upset about an apartment building being in the annex. And also my cousin lives at that building. So I would love to introduce Leanne to you if she can jump on now.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you so much, Alfred. The recounting of your experiences as a cliff dweller in the annex was truly captivating. It's evident that you hold this neighborhood as and its community in high regard, and I share your sentiment about the importance of preserving its unique charm. Yeah, renting an apartment in the Vincennes at 35 Walmer Road, in my experience, there are three key aspects associated with living here. So first of all, it's freedom. It's freedom that allows for a diverse range of choices, catering to various housing options and lifestyle preferences. And it fosters a vibrant and healthy multicultural community that we deeply cherish and appreciate. Then it's diversity, cultural and economic. In this building, students and university professors reside side by side, and lifelong tenants mingle with homeowners, creating a rich tapestry of diversity. And all, it really embodies the Canadian dream for all of us. On a personal note, living in a house with a backyard and a dog for many years was wonderful. But I must admit that there's also something refreshing about meeting my neighbors in the elevator and engaging in interesting conversations about travel, music, or art. And having such a vibrant community around me really never ceases to be enjoyable. I moved more than 10 times within the GTA after I came to Canada 30 years ago, in the hopes of finding a place that feels like home. And really never have I felt so at home as I do in the Vincennes. This community in our building also has a Facebook group. We have a WhatsApp group to stay in touch, to help each other and share community announcements and emergencies. And of course, the COVID era was everything that I'm talking about here was really peaking. And so this community is only possible because of that freedom and diversity of choice for everybody. And so here is a fragment, if I may, from a message that we received from Joy, one of our beloved neighbors. And she says, we, the residents of 35 Walmer, enjoy the spacious suites and amazing views north and south of Pri's design. Thank you so much for the work you're doing to keep us appraised of these developments and your attention to the issues. It also crafts some sense of community here. We have lived at 35 Walmer since 1998 and hope to continue as we age. Thank you so much.
Rita, did you want to go to questions from the audience if there are any? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Trying to listen to my own advice. I think I know we have a few minutes and Alfred is here, so I think it would be really terrific if we opened up the floor to some questions.
People can either type a question in the chat or use the raise hand feature. I'm sure there's actually a lot of questions, just who's going to go first.
Well, maybe I could just intervene here and give Rebecca a seat because do you want to tell people that you won?
Oh, well, of course. I would like to say I'm getting, from I feel like a phone caller. No, what am I trying to say? I got a text from someone saying that your talk should be considered mandatory viewing for everyone who works in the city, everyone who questions it.
Well, you can use it for whatever you like, right?
But also, Rebecca, do you want to say what happened at City Hall today?
Yeah, I thought that was what you were going to talk about. Or some kind of
Yes, please fill us in.
Helpful for tenants happen, although it's not like it's
well, maybe it's one of those, distraction elephants.
That's what we're a little worried about, but it might be.
I have to admit, I'm like a little shaking, but also I was a little out of it for all of it. But there were a number of things sort of embedded in emotion brought forward that, initiated with Councillor Sachs and Councillor Moyes, and then it kept going. And then Councillor Matlow has brought this up in planning and housing. So then it was in city council. So it's an ongoing battle, of course. And some of the main concerns are around the rent gap payments and looking at the type of data that is being used, because based from last year to this year, you know, the amounts were gonna go down for tenants, they were gonna be very small, and tenants, so now at least they're reconsidering using a different data set, I should say, like, that's more reflective of the rents that are out there, and also that tenants will be consulted in the process. So I think those are the biggest wins for us. And just being able to have that open conversation and be in those conversations with city council and with city staff, as much as the developers, is really heartfelt for the tenants who are 50% of the city and 70% of the annex. So I'm going to.
Thank you for that update. So I didn't realize I was on mute before, but what I was saying at the end of your talk, Alfred, was that I hope people have a better understanding of some of the residents in our neighborhood, the 70% for the most part, and add some faces, context, history to some of these buildings that we walk by all the time.
It's really quite a fun history. I did want to comment on something Leanne said. I'm very familiar with 35, and I know I didn't actually meet the Hillers. I think I met Mrs. Hiller once. This was a family that built the building. She was quite a character. Some of you might remember. But what I wanted to comment on was one of the features of apartment life in the annex that hardly is ever discussed is the Cold War that exists between tenants and landlords. And it doesn't really have to do with tenants being good tenants or bad. It has to do with things like wanting to move to someone else's apartment and swap apartments like I did, but they don't allow it. And there's all kinds of little things that happen in which you see normal life is interfered with by strange Cold War tactics that both the tenants and the owners play off against each other. And in that, I think the superintendents generally have a difficult role to play, but they tend to side with, in my experience, they tend to side with the tenants because they get to know them. And my point about the buildings, people in the buildings caring more, I think that as a revelation that the people in the buildings care more than the landlords about them.
Well, I have something to say. I'll jump in here. I have something to say about that. I think that now that housing has become so financialized, and for many people, it's a question of getting on the ladder and seeing their house as an investment. Tenants can't do that, you know. So if they are long-term tenants and they really do love their space and their building, they can't sell it, you know. They just have to love it for itself. It's not a commodity that they can trade around. So weirdly, I think it's possible that tenants sometimes are more emotionally attached to their space than homeowners are.
Yeah, I would say that's very much the case.
Not always, but it happens.
Well, one of the things that happens is renovations, and I think Charlotte knows about that, but you can feel devastated because some owner of your building who doesn't care about it particularly, but sees it as part of a ledger of some kind, or just doesn't know, they will do renovations that take away much of the spirit of the building that you've come to appreciate and feel very close to.
Rita, I don't know if we have time for a question, but Ashwin has his hand up.
Sure, Ashwin, go for it.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Alfred. I mean, actually, that was one of my questions when you mentioned Nina Poss and you know, swapping your apartments, was just adding just a little bit more color as to how that came about.
Well, Nina lived next to me, and how did that happen? Well, the rule in our building was that you can't change apartments. And for some reason, the management company decided the paperwork wasn't worth it. Why should they allow this? But of course, your circumstances keep changing. So I get a job that pays a bit more, and she's becoming a student. So we thought, well, you need a lower rent, and I would like to live on this corner. So this wasn't allowed. But what we did is we went to the couple that you saw in the picture of the superintendents who were retiring. And Betty Penny on the right, I think in the picture, this sweet lady, she had nerves of steel. And she would tell you about this rule, and she would look at you, and then she would say, well, what do you think we should do about it? And then she'd say, well, leave it to me. And then you'd get your apartment. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, I think we could actually do a book called Superintendent Stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Get you on the rooftop, get your new apartment. That's pretty good.
I know we don't have a lot of time, but Alfred did tell me the whole, like, I don't know, Baroque story of how they got the keys to get onto the roof, but we'll save that for another time.
Okay, well, if you ever want to know how to make keys.
Yeah.
We know how to do it.
I mean, Alfred should be in jail is what
I
I
know.
want to say. So,
I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah. Well,
All
that
right,
was really
well-
terrific.
we will end with Alfred happily free.
But we were locked out of the roof garden.
Yeah, and why should that go on? Okay, bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.